So what we're going to look at today is the importance of communication. So a very quick little webinar today. Look at the key communication elements, improving your communication skills and fostering a collaborative workplace as well. All very important parts of any founder journey and of any journey to do with startups at all. So first of all, let's get a bit of an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about communication. In the context of the world we're looking at, startups, new businesses, small business owners, a clear exchange of information that leads to a mutual understanding. And I think that's really important to define as early on as possible, is that this needs to be clear. Because when things become very unclear, when they become vague, and we Aussies do vague very, very well. We end our sentences early. We end our words early. We're often not saying what we mean. Aussies tend to talk in what we're not. So we say, how are you feeling? Not bad. What are you doing? Not much. That's vague. Very, very vague. It's very colloquial, very cool if you grew up in an Australian context. But if you didn't, that's a little hard to follow sometimes. It also is realizing that communication happens from more than just what comes out of our mouths. It's also about what the non-verbal cues are, how our body language looks, how we use gestures, the tone of our voice, not just the words that are coming out, but how those words are coming out. I think it's equally important simply because, and I just need to reach across and wipe my screen a little bit because my camera is looking a little bit yucky today. So it's about making sure that we've got the kind of communication that works for as many people as possible, not just for those who grew up speaking English as a first language. Now, the role of communication in the work setting is, first of all, we need a smooth flow of our work and our coordination to work between one team member and another so that things get done. We can't get work done if we can't communicate with each other. That seems like such an obvious thing, but it bears repeating, because how many times have you been in a workplace where communication hasn't occurred? We can go to very large corporations or even government where the complaint often is that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. So we want to avoid that. Communication skills help to smooth out the workflow. It helps people to be able to coordinate better between departments, between teams, between even us and our customers. When communication breaks down, the first we hear about it is because our customers start complaining about it. Secondly, communication helps to enhance productivity by reducing the amount of misunderstandings. You know what I just said about clear communication and not being vague? Clear communication makes things work better, makes things work more efficiently, and overall makes them work more effectively. Because the misunderstandings don't happen in the first place. When one person communicates and the other person receives that communication and confirms that they understand, things happen more smoothly. And because things happen smoothly and there's no vagaries, there's no misunderstandings, we see that trust builds between teams, between colleagues, between us and our customers even. And that means that teamwork happens. And teamwork's not just an internal thing. Teamwork can be between us and our customers, because remember, our customers are essentially part of our team as well. In fact, our customers are that unpaid team member who's often doing a lot of the selling for us, recommending things for us. So in that case, what we want to do is make sure that that smooth communication happens, that clear communication happens, so the trust can happen between you and your customer, you and your colleague, you and one team and another, your New South Wales division and your Victoria division and your Northern Territory division and your Southeast Asian division and whoever. Whatever those teams happen to be, clear communication is where that trust starts. It also fosters a great work culture, because when things are transparent and things are clear, there's that lack of misunderstandings means that there's no sort of us and them starts to develop. And that's the death of teamwork and collaboration in any organization, is when we start talking about that group over there as them, and that's us versus them all the time. We don't want to do that. We want to avoid that as much as we can, simply because we want our culture to work. We want the transparency to work as well. Now, the impacts on poor communication have probably been covered a lot by those corporate downfalls, like for instance, where a chief information officer hasn't adequately explained to the chief executive officer that the cybersecurity hack is going to cause them problems down the track. If that doesn't come across clearly or they get overridden, well, that means that then that doesn't get fixed. So the impact of poor communication in its most bare bones case is decreased productivity. That's at the very least. Things don't flow smoothly. They flow slowly. We often see this in government because the information is going through so many different people, so many different approvals, so many checks and balances that you play a game of telephone, which is basically what we used to call when I was young Chinese whispers before we learned that that was actually kind of a little bit racist. The idea that one person passes on to the next person, passes on to the next person, and things get missed, things get dropped, and things don't go according to plan. So that decreased productivity is the least that can happen. Then it gets a little bit worse. Because we're not communicating clearly, relationships start to get a little bit tense. They get a bit strained, and suddenly there's conflicts between one employee and another. And this could be over the most silly things. It could be around budgeting. It could be about who takes breaks when. Very rarely is the conflict that is reported the conflict where it began. Usually the beginning is a lack of transparency and clarity between one person and another. You see it with passive aggressive fridge files, like notes left on fridges about people not doing this or not cleaning up that, and people speaking to each other like they're children. And then someone says, well, if you didn't act like a child, I wouldn't speak to you like a child. And it all just goes into World War III. Those strained relationships would become so much clearer if people got clear and very precise in their communication much earlier in the process. And of course, if you've got strained relationships, your morale's going to fall through the floor, and you're going to have people just who stop communicating with each other altogether. Entire departments will refuse to work with other departments. Communication just won't happen. There will be no exchange of ideas, and there'll be no innovation. If there's no innovation, there's a really dangerous position to leave a company in. And then at the end of it, and this is probably the worst part of it all, is you suddenly end up in a situation where you have issues with your customers telling you that things aren't working. Negative customer satisfaction means less revenue, less new customers, and your reputation is just shot to pieces. And that all started potentially because two people didn't communicate clearly with each other. Two people who weren't even facing the customer themselves had a problem, and it just compounded and compounded and compounded and compounded right through the chain until the person that was supposed to serve that customer wasn't able to give them the service they expected because of some decision or some conflict that happened further up the chain. This is not wishful thinking. It's not just like you're going, oh, that's a bit of a stretch. It's not. This happens every single day. The bad service you get in a restaurant comes from a root of something to do with communications at some point. So what are the elements if we're going to attack this whole problem of poor communication? What are the elements of really good communication? Well, verbal communication is probably where we need to start because that's what we understand mostly as communication. There's written stuff out there as well, but verbally, we want to make sure that we are clear. And quite often, and I used to have this as part of my training when I was in radio many, many years ago, where a particular boss of mine said, if you can't say it in 15 seconds, then don't say it. Just leave it. Go to the next song. The clarity here is often accompanied by a conciseness. And the conciseness means if you've got less time to play with, you're going to not put as much words in there because it won't fit the time. So if you have something really important to say, find the quickest, most simple way to say it. Imagine that you're talking to a 5-year-old. The comprehension levels of a 5-year-old are remarkably good, but they're not so good that they're going to sit there with a very short attention span and listen to every single word you say over the process of 10 to 15 minutes. I don't know if you've ever seen a child sitting in a conference during a 1-hour keynote session. It doesn't end well for anybody. So clarity and a bit of time restriction there would really help you. It also means that if you're talking, you have to be an insanely good listener. Now, that may seem weird because you're saying, oh, wait, I'm the one speaking. Why am I doing listening? Well, listening isn't just listening with your ears, it's listening with your eyes. And that means taking in feedback from the environment around you. Read the room. That's often when speakers say, oh, you just need to read the room. That's what they're talking about, is taking back the feedback of people's physical positions, their way they're interacting with you as a speaker to understand that there really needs to be a two-way street there. Now, it may not be necessary people are talking back to you. Sometimes they will. Often it's just you taking note of the room and how it's responding to what you're saying. Now, a lot of the issues with teaching, with training, doing workshops, can be solved by the confidence of the presenter. A good, strong leader often really just knows how to communicate really well verbally. They could be talking about absolutely anything that they know almost nothing about, but if they're confident with it, they can certainly get their message across much more consistently and much more convincingly. And something that sort of gives you a bit of a thoughtful inquiry. So thoughtful inquiry in this case means really that you're making people think as you're speaking. So the things you say, particularly in a workplace where it might be directorial, so you're giving them an instruction, what you're doing is helping them to think this through. So that then they might come back and ask a question to clarify the position if it wasn't clear enough for them. Or what's more likely is they think about it, how it applies to them, and from there they move forward into action. So your verbal communication, clear, short, based upon reading the room, being able to see what's going on around you, being confident in your expression, not being very uncertain, a little bit mousy, oh, I don't know, am I really meant to be here? If you've got a lot of imposter syndrome with that, there's other things you can do to address that. But that confident expression is absolutely everything. All the best speeches you've ever heard came with a level of confidence. And of course, making people think. Now, that's the stuff we've got coming out of our mouth. There's all these other areas of a communication as well. The nonverbal stuff starts really with body language. Someone who's got open body language, leaning forward into a conversation, somebody who is nodding in agreement, we call that active listening, that they will see that, oh yeah, they're taking that in. Often what we do is our body reflects the comfort level we've got. I'm sitting up here really, really tight with my shoulders kind of hunched like this. It shows that I've got a little bit of tension in me and I'm probably not convinced with what I'm trying to say as well. So that really, really confident expression doesn't come through. But if I relax, sit back and chill, confident that I know what I'm talking about, then things come across more convincingly. You understand that communication is so much more able to reach its target. Now, the tone sensitivity can often be seen as, think about a newsreader. Okay, let's think about a newsreader. They'll tend to read in a very monotone with the occasional sing-songy kind of approach to it. So it'd be, today in Parramatta, we saw that there was yet another incidence of child violence. Whilst people were traveling through the mall at 2:32 p.m., police say that, and so it's very clear and a little bit sing-songing, but it's also not the way people normally speak. It's a little bit fake. Yet in news, that's how it's communicated. Every news reader essentially sounds the same, right? There's not much variation between them. You can pick up anyone and replace it with anyone else's voice and no one would notice. But when it's you presenting something, when you're putting an idea across, there's a sensitivity you need to make to tone. An aggressive tone where you're speaking like this is very different to a non-aggressive tone. It's speaking like this. The tone, the pauses, the way you go up and down with those different tones makes a big difference to communication. I know people, when they're learning a language like Mandarin, often get very stuck on the tones, that the same sound, but with a different tone, an up, a middle, or a down tone, can mean three completely different words. It does that in English too, but we are perhaps just as subtle with that because the three different tones, if we sort of ask with an inquiring voice, we go, well, is that right? And we'll go up, and that's where we're looking for a response. So we're saying, is it right? And we're asking a question. If you go, is it right? Well, that's you making a statement. That's more of a down tone where you're actually making a strong statement and not looking for an answer to that question. So understanding how to deliver it in a way that you see the best speakers doing, mimic that, because that really helps you to communicate clearly. Also, understand the impact of your communication. A very hard line impact could cause people to rise in anger or rise in agreement with you. And also understand what it is you want people to do. That nonverbal communication the way you present things, the way you might walk around on stage if you're working very hypnotically, going backwards and forwards is quite hypnotic. And it's actually a very effective technique for helping get a message inside someone. Your information from your communication has some impact with that. But otherwise, you might do things that are really, really distracting. I had the misfortune of seeing a speaker as part of a conference recently who was like prowling around the stage like a leopard, like just going up and then down into the crowd and walking around. And it's to the point where that non-verbal communication of walking around all that just made him look really nervous and fidgety, to the point where his entire message was almost ignored and lost simply because nobody could understand what the hell he was going on with, because all they could watch was this weird guy wandering around on stage doing weird accents. It was a terrible experience for people to watch. And the message got really lost because his non-verbal communication really needed to be addressed. And your facial expressions. If you're talking about something with a big smile on your face and a bit of a laugh, people tend to go, oh, yeah, you could say things that are not funny, but they will appear like they're funny or at least happy. But if you deliver something really, really seriously, it comes with a tone of voice that matches that. But it also, the face going all frowny and the furrowed brows tend to communicate to someone, oh, not only is this serious, but they might be a little bit upset with me. And people respond differently if they think you're upset with them. Visual communication then is a whole other area. So we've had the verbal coming out of your mouth and the body language. Now the visual communication is where you're using visual aids, such as I'm doing with this slide deck. So you would use this to help to make your message more clear. So if you want to tell stories as part of what you're telling out of your mouth, then you might use your visual aids like Canva or PowerPoint or Google Sheets or in the Keynote, which is the Mac version of all these. Then you've got the opportunity to be able to make that so much more clear. So you might use presentations like I'm doing here. Charts and graphs are a really good way for more analytical people to understand concepts. It's also visualizing data into graphs and chats just makes it easier to see like an up spin or a downturn or a percentage of something. I could say that 72% of people never actually ever post on Instagram. But unless you see that in a chart and saying this big chunk of people never post, and this tiny little slice are the people that post, you're not just communicating a verbal concept, you're also communicating something visually. You're going through multi-senses, which means there's a thing called multi-model memory. A multi-model memory means that you're going through three different stages. Usually you're going through a sensory stage. So you're going through multiple senses like sound and vision, but then you've also got certain techniques you use to go through a short-term memory lock. So people will remember you for a short period of time and what you had to say. And then with repetition, you go through a long-term memory lock where someone will remember you and what you had to say for a very long time. I can go back to some of the more traumatic times of my life and remember exactly what was said and where it was said and what was on the screen at the time, because I was traumatized by that presentation, or I was highly inspired. And I can remember the things that were on that screen, the message that speaker that she happened to be talking about, happened to be saying. And I can even refer back to an October Business Month presentation from 2020, when we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there was hope that was communicated through this one particular presenter. She herself verbally was boring, but her presentation style was unique and authentic because of what she used in her visual aids. She visualized what she was talking about in simple photography, no words, just photography. Now, in the workplace, we don't just speak, we also type. We type a lot of emails, right? Having some sort of professional email etiquette can really help. And this is where tools like Grammarly can come in, where you might have, or even another one called, trying to remember the name of it. Very famous author, Hemingway. Hemingway is another one of those great tools, which allows you to assess the tone of your communications to make sure that they are professional, or whether it might be accusatory or something like that. These email helpers, these AI helpers, are really good at being able to untangle really bad writing, or writing that you think is really factual but is actually quite aggressive. So you can use these kinds of tools to help you become more professional and more etiquette-led with your communications. And then written clarity enhancement comes from basically just reading and rereading or using AI tools to rewrite things for you so that you're able to get that message across with the spirit that you want to get it across. If you have a positive message and it doesn't really read that positive, rewriting it through either your own self or through AI tools, please rewrite this as a more positive and uplifting tone. It will do that for you. And I highly recommend you do things like that. Just try not to use free AI tools if at all possible. And if you do use free AI tools, make sure there's nothing in that email which is confidential, because it goes into the training for that platform. So how do we improve? How do we get better at all this? Let's have a look at some strategies. First of all, active listening is the first step you can take, making sure you're not just hearing what's going in, it's going out through the other ear, and you're not just, on your phone the entire time, not really listening. And a lot of people may watch this while they're doing something else. That's not active listening. Active listening works on the theory, and it's pretty well known, it's not just a theory anymore, that we learn better when multiple senses are engaged. And that means the sight, seeing that stuff on the screen, that sound coming in through the voice, and also through nodding with agreement, with actually feeding back agreement, like, oh yeah, I agree with that, adds another dimension to locking that information in. We learn more when our body's involved than when our body's not involved. They often say that when you want to really address something in your life, you can do things like EFT tapping or emotional freedom technique tapping, which, just tapping in certain places when you want to associate something good with your life, you associate with it just a little tap. And then when you tap another time, your neural pathways already have that in place. Active listening works much the same. You associate learning with more than just listening and seeing, but also doing something physical that locks it in. So you might go tap on the desk, or you might nod. Nodding really helps because it's something you can associate with learning. You nod when you learn to indicate to the speaker that you're listening, and also to indicate your brain, this is important stuff to remember. Also, you can put a lot of techniques in there for more attentive listening, not just active listening, but being really attentive to it. So maintaining eye contact with people really helps. As a speaker, when I'm maintaining eye contact with people in a room, I make sure I cover just about all the room I can, because that lets people know that I'm speaking to them, not just them as a group, but each one of those people individually. If it's a small group of people, say 12 people, I make sure every single person in that room has a moment where I'm looking around and engaging with them eye to eye. It's not creepy when you do it to lots of people. If you just focus on one person, that is going to be creepy. Minimize your distractions when it comes to this. Now, this is both for people who are speaking and people who are listening. If you really want to be able to listen better, it's better off to turn your phone over the wrong way. And if I'm in a meeting, that's usually what I'll do. Turn the phone over so it's facing down. That way I don't have that constant distraction of notifications coming through and sounds and buzzing. And often what I'll do is even leave the phone in another room or put it in my pocket so that I can't even see it doing anything. In my case, being very ADHD, I also have to minimize my distractions on my desk, so that when I'm at my desk and I don't want people to note that I'm all over the place, I make sure I've got nothing to go all over the place too. So there's nothing on my desk, no signs and photos of loved ones and or plants even. There's nothing on there but my computer. And isolating that. So for instance, in this particular presentation, I've taken my laptop computer out of my office and come into another room where I don't have those different distractions always, people over there talking, and those distractions coming in all the time. When you're listening, focus on the speaker, just basically just by that, again, that eye contact, making sure you're facing towards them if you can, if it's possible. And that active listening where you're nodding and going along and go, yeah, okay, I hear you. Yeah, that's good. Where you're giving some sort of feedback to that person that you're learning and it's sinking in, that really is helpful too. And the whole undivided attention thing, that's put your phone down, face down. People think that that's like an untrustworthy thing. I think it was when you're with a partner, for instance, it might be considered untrustworthy because you don't want them to see what notifications you're getting. In a business environment, putting your phone face down means you're giving undivided attention, not watching a YouTube video at the same time. You're not, in the middle of eating lunch or something at the same time. The next bit is assertive communication, as where you express yourself confidently, you set boundaries for how to deal with that communication, and you handle things that are coming in in a tactful way. Let's break that down to three things. Expressing yourself confidently is something you do easily when you know what you're talking about. When you're talking about something you have no idea what it is, you're not going to be confident because you don't know what to say next. People who are and are and 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 like, those people are not expressing themselves confidently, usually because they're either unprepared to speak at the time, or they are just speaking about stuff they don't know enough about, which comes from a lack of preparation as well. When you speak from an area of authority and confidence and expertise, you will express yourself in a way that inspires confidence with other people. You will be confident. Now, the setting boundaries part is where you set boundaries for the tone or the outcomes of this conversation. Let's just say that you have a call to action at the end of an email. You said that email, you've said all the things you need to say in the email, and then you end with what's next. Now, what is next? Is it, can you please reply to me by 12 noon so that I can include this in our weekly report? Or can you please indicate what your RSVP numbers will be just so we can get all of the catering? Always set some kind of call to action when it comes to your communication. And the same goes for if you're a keynote speaker, always have somewhere for people to go next. Or if you're addressing a group in a meeting, always have some way of setting those boundaries. Sometimes those boundaries are determined by the highest paid person with an opinion in the room will be the one who sets what those boundaries are. But other times it might simply be that the boundaries are toilets are over there. You don't need to tell me if you need to go to the toilet. Just get up and go. I won't be offended. And if you do have a question, please just put your just indicate that you've got that question by putting your hand up. Just don't like school. Just go like that, and that's enough. Those kind of boundaries help with the clarity. So boundaries that are communicated clearly provide clarity, which means people don't misunderstand what they're meant to do. Otherwise, someone could have a burning question that the rest of the room has as well, and no one will ever ask it because those boundaries weren't set. People weren't given permission to interact. And then when people do go over those boundaries, there is a way of handling it and there's a way of not handling it. I was in a recent meetup with a group of technical people, and somebody was speaking them as a guest speaker. And this person, clearly, she is a bit of an authoritarian, right? Likes people to just do as she wants them to do. And if they don't, she gets very demanding. And it didn't go down well. And it was like a parent schooling a child. It really rubbed me the wrong way because I thought this is not a great way to communicate with people, and people won't answer your questions and ask you questions at the end if you treat them like children and make it unsafe for them to do that. And of course, when we got to the end, nobody asked any questions of her because she made herself unapproachable and very aggressive. And so nobody wanted to ask questions for fear of being shot down. That's not handling people on their phones tactfully. Handling people on their phones tactfully will be going, look, it appears we're all a little bit distracted by our phones at the moment. So I want to give you 60 seconds. Just deal with that message, finish reading that thing, give you 60 seconds. Let's get all out of our systems. And then what I want you to do is pick up your phone, put it flat down. That way we can get what we need out of this conversation and then move on. That's tactful. Telling people they're children for not listening and that they need to listen to you because you are the boss is not tactful, and it's not going to make any friends, and it's certainly not going to make anyone want to listen to you. They might comply, but they're only going to do it under protest. The next, we're looking at expressing opinions and ideas confidently. This is where you know your stuff. You know your stuff well enough to be able to express them. You want to, yes, have personal limits and have some expectations, particularly in a meeting environment, that you need to maintain that balance. It's also important when you're emailing people to maintain that balance. Give people an easy way to respond to you so that you have the feedback you need to make decisions. And then finally, understanding that handling difficult conversations, you do it in a way that's tactful. It still maintains your confidence, also maintains your personal limits. That's great. But when you do it tactfully, you get people on board with you as a team. People will do it because they want to do it, because you're a great person and you've handled this really well. And I want to listen to you now because, yeah, I was doing the wrong thing. When people realize they're doing the wrong thing, they'll come on board for that journey with you and go all the way. When you try to drag them kicking and screaming, they don't really want to be playing. They don't really want to play with you because you're being aggressive and not particularly helpful. Then they're not going to want to ask questions. They're not going to want to participate. And before you know it, they're back on their phones and fading away again. Our non-verbal communication, this is where we're using, gestures. We're using gesticulation, our hands, thumbs up like this guy here, or there might be sort of acting out a scene. These things convey just as much, if not more, meaning than the words themselves. I could be shaking my head and saying, yes, we can do this with you, and we can do it at a great price as well. And as I'm shaking my head, I'm actually negating all the words I just said. I was just talking about giving you a great price and saying I can definitely do with it, but I was saying, no, I can't as well. What happens then, by the shaking of that head, all those words become mute. So what happens is that the gesture outweighs the words. The message gets completely lost because your body is saying something else. That's how powerful nonverbal communication is. So there's ways of you sort of working around. There's an open posture with welcoming gestures that invites people in, maintaining eye contact with different people to maintain their engagement and make them feel like they're part of this conversation you're having, not this one-way monologue like this webinar today. Mirroring is great because it helps build rapport. So if people are sort of sitting back and relaxing, if you sit back and relax as well, you become part of the tribe, part of the team, rather than you being rigidly standing upright and making sure that everybody mirrors you. You're better off going to a position where you mirror them and smiling for a little bit of warmth. It certainly puts people off edge when there is a smile that is authentic. So when you smile, not that hi, how are you guys? This is fantastic to be here. I can't wait to talk to you. Feels so fake. And we all say straight through it. So that when we have these very hyper enthusiastic, super bubbly, usually American big hair, big teeth speakers, we feel like, oh, what are you trying to sell me? Because that's what it feels like. It feels like someone's trying to take something from you. The don'ts will be these crossed arms and fidgeting and sort of picking at your beard and scratching your face and picking your nose and all that sort of fidgeting. I'm a fidgeter from way back, but I've managed to find ways to do my fidgeting that aren't really that noticeable, simply because my ADHD makes me do that. So I've then gone, okay, I can still do that thing, but I've got rules around it. When I want to fidget, I train myself now to fidget in a way which is much harder to spot and doesn't distract people. Steer clear of prolonged staring. That's what I was saying before. You're looking around a table at people, look at one of them at a time, but don't just sit there and stare at one of them because it gets awkward, it gets weird, it gets creepy. No one likes that. Minimizing distractions, we've gone through that. If you need to remove things like your phone from the equation, do that. And watch for people's facial expressions. If you're speaking and other people are responding to you, you can see on their faces whether they're not understanding, whether they're curious, whether they're engaged, whether they're bored, whether they're asleep. You can see it all on their faces. So take notice of what's going on in those faces and change your approach accordingly. Finally, we're going to look at fostering that collaborative workspace. We all want that because we want to have a trusted team full of great rapport because our communication's right. Our communication's clear. Everyone understands, everyone's on board, so we can do things really effectively and efficiently. But we also want to encourage some kind of open feedback loop. When we're just broadcasting a message out there, we're not giving people an opportunity to be able to add their 2 cents to it. When people don't feel safe, they shut down. And this is what happened in that particular digital meetup once, where people didn't feel safe to ask questions, so they didn't ask questions. They just shut down. They got shy and they were like, I don't really trust her to not shoot me down because I said something she doesn't find interesting or correct. What we want to do is resolve conflicts in a constructive, quick, and effective way. And conflicts in workplaces are often the easiest ones to solve because they don't come with a kind of years of resentment and repetitively bad behavior and bad feedback like relationships do. Work conflicts are generally caused by a lack of communication or lack of clear communication. So we can get that communication thing fixed. If we can make it sure that everybody understands what we're saying, then we'll find that the conflicts often will solve themselves. And by promoting a culture of inclusivity and respect, we're promoting a place where it's safe. People are safe to ask questions, particularly if you have a policy which says there is no such thing as a dumb question. The dumbest questions are the ones you don't ask. And I think that's one of the most powerful things you can put in a workplace, that people have the right and the expectation that they will ask questions if they don't understand. If you don't understand a word, ask them to re-explain that to them. My partner comes from an English as second language background, and so therefore will ask questions when I need to clarify a word that doesn't make sense, or a very technical word, or a word which is delivering English in a weird way that's not particularly clear for someone who didn't grow up speaking English. So that kind of thing means that in the intricate dance of communication, clarity lights up understanding. Empathy, which is that connection, that rapport between people, means that connection can happen. And real connection means that we can succeed. Things flow smoother, things flow better, things flow in a much less controversial state. People aren't at each other's throats simply because we started from the very, very, very moment of being super clear about what we mean. Say what we mean what we say. It's one of the big rules of truth and authenticity and honesty is say what you mean and mean what you say. That simply means be clear. Don't be all weird and have to tell a story about every single clear communication or instruction you want to put through to your team. Clarity trumps clever. If you have a choice between being funny and being clear, always choose being clear.